Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
That's with our fond remembrances of Evan, always making sure that we have our captions on for him.
Yes.
So Evan, hope you're watching the meeting today from wherever you are residing right now. Um, would you like me to start?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So I see, let's see.
And I put you on speaker view.
Okay, that's fine. And I also see some people still have their cameras on. So if you have your camera on, can you turn it off? Because I'm seeing moving hands across my screen and
All right, I'll
somebody,
shut them.
okay. Okay, so welcome everyone. First thing that I'd like to ask is if anybody is joining us today for the first time. If you are, wave your hand by going down to, where do we do that? Let's see. Okay, Adam is new. Anybody else? And okay, there's Adam. And I don't think anybody else is new today.
Dina,
Oh, do you see anybody else, Marilyn? Oh, Dina Lichtman.
Dina,
And
Simone Gorko.
okay, and
We
that's
have some guests from Hammock today.
excellent.
So welcome.
Excellent. Welcome, everyone. So, my name is Felicia Alexander, and it is my joy to be the president of the society. And I don't have too big a role at this meeting because Marilyn will be sharing information with you, as will Mark Halpern, who will be talking about our upcoming events. But I would like to tell you that we're always looking for people who have interesting stories to share that can send that story into our wonderful publication, Chronicles. You can send it to editor at jgasgp.org. And we're always looking for good articles about discoveries that you've made, or a new research method that you've discovered, or just a great human interest story about genealogy. I would like to say that I heard a really good podcast yesterday that the guest speaker on the podcast was a fellow some of you probably know. His name is Jay Sanderson. Do any of you know his name? He's from the West Coast, but he's very interested. He's the new president of Jewish the Jewish University that's in LA. Jewish, I think it's just called the Jewish University. At any rate, he has a lot of publications out, and he's interested in genealogy and adding it to their university. So someone else was on with him who was talking about the genealogy program at Gratz College. So that's something for you guys to keep in mind as you do your research. I'm going to now pass on to Marilyn so that she can talk about membership, and then Mark will talk about our upcoming events and introduce Deborah. Okay, I'm going to mute my camera and my microphone.
Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that all of you have today's handout. For those of you who don't, check your email. If not, I will try to put it in the chat if you write to me and don't have it. It is quite lengthy, and Deborah did give us a lot of information. So, well, I'm so glad you're here. Make sure you check this week's newsletter that I will be sending out tonight or tomorrow. That will have a little bit of a summary of today's meeting and a link to the recording because it looks like it's working. And also, I just want to remind you to please make sure that you send in your membership dues. If you're new, uh, don't send them again. But if you're a current member and need to renew for 2026, please do so because next month we will have a special meeting that is for paid members only. And Mark will tell us about that. Just want to remind you that we do have a book club, and the book club is we are reading Inheritance by Danny Shapiro, a terrific book. We will be discussing that January 28th at 7:30 p.m. I'll be sending the link that day. Also, we have our Everything Genealogy meeting February 3rd. And that has turned out to be really fantastic. Members just sign in at 7:30 and ask questions, and you just never know what you're going to find. So I'm really, really happy that we have a great social group as well as a great educational group. Um, a membership is close to 400, which is wonderful and is currently growing. So if you have any questions, please write to me. My email, you'll be getting emails from me constantly. Hope you're happy. Mark, it's all yours.
Okay. I hope you can hear me with my great voice. uh, it's just a little bit of a problem, but I'm not making any long presentations. Um, on the schedule for February was a day of learning uh, in memory of Evan Fishman. We're still working on that, and hopefully February 22nd will be the date for that, and we'll have the speakers announced well before that. But if we can't get the speakers we want for February, it may be delayed to another month. So just keep looking at the website or look at Marilyn's uh, emails to membership, which will have an update on that. Today, we have the honor of having Debbie Long speak to us. Debbie has been researching her family history and searching for surviving family members for more than 60 years. She started as a 10-year-old, okay, writing to the International Red Cross, which, if you know what Arrelson is now, that's who handled the Arrelson files before Arrelson was open to the public. Both of her parents were Holocaust survivors and were in some of the worst places imaginable. Debbie is a professional educator and speaker. She has written more than 20 books, including a memoir about growing up as a child of survivors titled First Hitler, Then Your Father, and Now You. She earned a doctorate in adult education. She is the founder and first president of the Triangle JGS of North Carolina, which covers Chapel Hill, Durham, and Raleigh. Please give a warm welcome to Debbie. The floor is yours, Debbie.
Mark, so nice to see you. Thank you, and Marilyn, for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to honor my parents and the other members of my family who survived or didn't survive in the Holocaust. I do want to point out that I pondered a long time about the title of my program because depending on the audience I'm speaking to, I sometimes change the subtitle to Finding Your Family Murdered in the Holocaust because I think lost makes it sound like they're out there somewhere, and I just haven't done a very good job of looking for them. I think it plays down what happened to Jewish people and others in the Holocaust, but that's just a little side note. Before I get started, I wanted to make sure, and I'm going to ask Mark for his help with this, and Marilyn, I'm going to be switching back and forth between PowerPoint as well as the internet because I want to demonstrate some of these sites. So if the switch doesn't work really well, sometimes it happens on Zoom, just let me know and I will make sure that you're looking at what you want to see. I'd also like to know how many of you have family members who perished in the Shoah. Shoah, of course, is the Hebrew term for the Holocaust. It means the great catastrophe or the great loss. I see a lot of hands going up. Okay, and for those of you who might not have raised your hands, my observation would be chances are you do have family members who perished in the Holocaust. You just don't know who they are or what happened to them. Because if you scratch the skin of any Jewish person, chances are they did lose members of their family. They just haven't done the homework yet. I'm asked a lot about why I dwell in the Holocaust history of my family. And I actually think the best response I've heard was one from Arthur Kurzweil. Many of you know him as the father of Jewish genealogy. I think he said it best. He said that when the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, then the Jews did their family trees. Sometimes, if you want to go forward, you first have to go backward. You see where you're coming from and you know where you're going. Most people in the world don't know quite what to do with the Holocaust, but I think we genealogists have found out what to do. We remember names. When the Nazis rounded us up, they took away our names and they gave us numbers. What we are involved with doing is taking away their numbers and giving them back their names. When I was growing up, I knew I lived in a haunted house, that there were ghosts who were swirling all over my family home. But I heard two contradictory things when I became interested in finding out more. My own mother said, Europe is just one big cemetery. She didn't want me to go back and find any artifacts. She said, nothing remains, everything was destroyed. But I also heard my mother and my father and their friends say the Nazis kept very good records. Well, it's not easy to do both. I mean, either things are destroyed or records exist. And what I discovered was that perhaps my parents didn't want to suffer more than they already did. But in fact, records not only exist, there are an incredible number of records. And if you actually go back to Europe, you can find an incredible amount of surviving artifacts. So, what I would like to do is to help you think through an orderly research process to find out as much as you can about not only names and numbers, but also the fates of your family. The place that I think is the most important place to start is Arelson. And then the next place to go would be the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Now, as Marilyn pointed out, I gave you 17 pages of resources. So we're only going to be covering the most important resources where to start. And then if you really want to go down some rabbit holes, you've got 17 pages of rabbit holes to take a look at. But let's start with what used to be called the ITS, the International Tracing Service, and now is called the Arelson Archives, located in Bad Arelson in Germany. Now, this is the best place to start for tracing individuals. As you heard Mark say, this used to be a function of the International Red Cross. It became a function of the International Tracing Service and very recently changed its name after the place where this repository is located in Germany to the Arelson Archives. What you will find at Arelson and online are records of forced laborers, camp prisoners, DPs. And what's good about all of the resources I'm going to show you actually is nothing I'm going to share with you today is going to cost you any money. All of these places we're going to go to are free, and many of them have searchable records available right online, so you won't even have to leave your seat. This is perhaps the most important resource if you are going to be doing family research, especially if you are seeking or a family member is seeking some kind of restitution or compensation. Here is a picture of the Arelson Archives itself. It is a huge place. It houses more than 30 million original documents with 50 million reference cards and references to more than 17.5 million individuals. There's a very good chance that you're going to find records in the Arelson Archives, just millions of index cards and digital databases. And even though you might think, what more is there left to be found? Every single year, more records become available, and they're becoming more available online through digitization because Arelson has partnered with Ancestry, Yad Vashem, and Jewish Gen, just to name a few. Let's take a look, first of all, at the types of documents you might find in the Arelson records. First of all, there'll be persecution documents. These will be concentration camp records, including prisoner registration cards. One of your colleagues mentioned having numbers that he thinks might be related to the persecution of his family members. You might be able to find some of those numbers in these registration cards. There may be transfer cards that show your family member going from one camp to another. There are death lists, medical records, work assignments, there are Gestapo files. There are ghetto records that are housed within the Arelson repository. There are forced labor records. There are millions of documents that are related to people who were forced to work under Nazi rules. So you might find work cards, personnel files, ID cards, information from state-run labor institutions. There may be some correspondence about laborers between German employers and authorities. For example, Siemens was a huge employer of Jewish slave labor, and you might find some correspondence in the Arelson records. There are also lists of forced workers. So if your family was forced to go into Siberia, for example, at the beginning of the war, you might find some records there as well. Also of use are the DP records, the displaced persons records. Arelson holds registration cards, resettlement records, UNRWA documents, IRO documents. These are all from the UN, as well as camp rosters and cards that indicate your family was trying to leave a DP camp and go to a particular address or a particular country and request for any kind of assistance, or requests even for, tell me what happened to my brother. Do you have any records about where he wound up? There are also death and burial records for concentration camp and forced labor victims. There are even post-war exhumation records, cemetery records, and reparation or restitution records as well. And then what are called the TND files, the tracing files. Back in 1945, a lot of people were already trying to find what had happened to their family members, and ITS at that time was keeping records of all of the tracing requests. So if you have a relative who, like my mother, was looking for 6 siblings and what might have happened to them, your ancestor, your family member might have written to the Red Cross or to the ITS, and those letters were kept. So you might know what preliminary searches were done or how hard a family member might have been looking for another family member. So any kind of search request was kept. And there's also internal research documentation that is used to determine what might have happened to that family member. So if you're getting an idea that Arelson is a good place to start, you're absolutely right. Again, there are just millions of records from all different places in Europe and other places as well. There's, for example, incredible amount of documentation if you know that your family members were in Dachau or in Buchenwald, and there are also transport lists. What I tried to do with every one of my family members is to create a timeline of where they were and when, and then later did some heritage travel to actually walk in their footsteps and get a sense of some of the challenges of the terrain and the topography, especially for example, when my father was on a forced death march towards the end of the war. I'd like to share with you this short little video to give you a sense of what is behind the scenes at Arelson. So if you get a little frustrated waiting for some records to come to you, I think you'll get some appreciation of exactly what is going on behind the scenes. Please let me know if for any reason you can't hear the sound. I am sharing my sound with you as we watch this video. Here's a problem.
For many, many people who disappeared, who were killed by the Nazis, there is nothing. There is no grave, there is absolutely no inscription whatsoever, except for a line, birth date sometimes, and a name. These documents, it's a testimony, it's a witness to what happened. The Arelson archives hold 30 million documents. It's the largest worldwide archive on the persecution by the Nazis and on the survivors after the war. We had the intention to publish large collections online, and we didn't have the resources. So we were very privileged to find an excellent partner with Ancestry.
The partnership essentially involves the archives digitizing the millions of paper documents that they have, and Ancestry creating searchable indexes, and people everywhere can search the records for free.
7.5 years ago, I found a list from Auschwitz with my mother's signature on it. It was a list of 227 names that came from the Arlsen archive in Germany. What you can see at the front is Auschwitz, November 29th, 1944. It's a list of women prisoners. This is my mother's name. This is the number that was on her arm. This is her signature. And what's most compelling to me are the signatures, each different, each representing their personality. What I've been doing since then is going through name by name, trying to determine what happened to these girls, what's their story, where'd they come from, did they survive? I felt compelled to go to Arlsen to see if I could learn anything more, both about girls on the list as well as family members. This was a girl, 15 years old. As I was growing up, my mother told me if I would have an extra piece of bread, I would give it to Margitka. And if you had a gift of bread, that means you get to live another day.
It is more important than ever to show what can happen if these values about solidarity, about equality, about respect are not upheld.
Living memory is dying for those that were involved in the Holocaust. We need to capture that information so that even when they are gone, experiences that they went through can be preserved and shared for future generations.
Wait, what? What is this? That's my grandfather as well. It's extraordinary to see his actual signature and that he touched this card.
It is a privilege for us to contribute because of people like Alan, who are researching their relatives, but also other victims of the Nazis, because we contribute to the fact that they will not be forgotten.
Okay. I want to make sure, let me just stop screen sharing for just a moment. All of you were able to see the video. Can you give me a thumbs up? You were able to see it and hear it? Okay.
It worked.
Thank you.
It worked.
And I'm hoping that you got an appreciation for just the depth and breadth of the collection of Florian Azulay just recently has moved to another job outside of the Arlsen family, but I feel very comfortable that Arlsen will continue its mission of not only growing their records but also growing them online. Now, this is where you would start. That is the URL, HTTPS, et cetera, et cetera. And when you go to that particular link, this is the page you're going to see. And I have to tell you, many of these sites are so robust that they are somewhat confusing in terms of where exactly do you start. But if you take a look at the left-hand side, you will see a search and browse the archive. Those are two very important links or clicks that you should make, but also come over here to the right and you can see it says EN. If you were to click on that, you would see a choice of languages. Thankfully, English is available because in spite of the fact that my parents spoke 7 or 8 languages in our home, they raised me to be a very good American, and I only speak 2, and that is English and Southern English. So I'm very grateful when these websites are already translated into English. Now, when you click on the search link, you'll be able to very quickly go right into the search mechanisms, go into search mode, and you can search by your family member's name. Or if you don't know a name, you just know that they came from a small village, you can also search by the name of a town and see the lists of records that might include that particular town. Now, I don't want you to get discouraged because if some of you are trying this right now, you might not find any documents, and what you might be thinking is nothing exists when quite to the contrary, there are things that exist, but the documents you happen to be looking for have not yet been either indexed or digitized. I'm going to go ahead and click on this link. And again, I'm going to need some help to know if you can actually see a live screen here for the Arelson archives. Marilyn or Mark, can you actually see a blue header here that says Arelson archives or not?
It's not blue.
No.
Okay. That's because Zoom has a very limited function here of going to the internet directly, but now you should be able to see it says
Yeah.
Arelson archive on the top.
Yes.
Okay. The very simplest thing here is to put in the name you're looking for. My mother's maiden name was Gallus. Thankfully, it wasn't all that common. I could certainly search for my mother specifically, but I just want to see when I'm beginning, are there any records for Gallus? So I'm going to go ahead and click on the search button, and you might want to do the same thing. And you should be able to see that there are some records that are coming up, 2,642 records. 270 records specifically, I guess that I would want to start to take a look at. And what I can do is click on any one of these. And over here on the side, I can see where I clicked on Joseph Gallus. At this point, I might not even know if this is one of my mother's relatives, but if I click on the record itself, it becomes enlarged. This happens to be an outside folder for documents for Joseph Gallus. I can see the date, the month he was born, October 22. I might want to see if that matches up with any other records. And inside the folder, there is a record that has some information about Joseph Gallus. If I want to copy this record, blow it up even more, there's a hot link down here at the bottom. Now, even if you look at this record, you might not know exactly what you're looking at. And that's why, let's go back here to my PowerPoint presentation. It's really important that as you start to find information, or even before you find information, that you go back to that main page and open up the e-guide, because you're going to be looking at records and might not know, what is this a record of? Translation these days is much easier than it was when I first started. You can go to a lot of different resources to get the document transcribed, but you still might not know the significance of it until you open up that e-guide. And again, don't get discouraged, because even if you don't find a record, records may exist, they're just not online yet, which is why what you want to do then is to send an inquiry and ask the Arelson archivists to do some research for you. Now, it might take some time to get an answer. So while you're waiting for Arelson to write back to you, you might want to be doing some other searching. In fact, I think it makes sense to do both, to exhaust what you might see online from the Arelson archives, and also say, well, do you have anything else besides what I was able to find? And if you're thinking, oh, these forms, they're just, going to be asking me a lot of questions, quite to the contrary, it's really easy to fill out an inquiry form. I actually do an inquiry every 3 years on the same people, because I keep thinking something new might show up. And apparently the folks at Arelson don't mind, because they've never told me to stop bothering them. I started this process, as Mark said, when I was a young girl, well before the ITS could give you information as quickly as it does. It takes about 6 to 12 weeks, so you can be doing some other researching. I don't think that's a very long time to have to wait, when a lot of our ancestors have been waiting to be found for such a long time. You have to remember that there are a lot of people doing what we're doing. The Arelson archives are fielding about 2,000 inquiries every single month, and it doesn't cost you a single dime to ask for help and to receive it. Again, if you want to know exactly where is the form to inquire, I've provided this link. And Marilyn, I'm not sure that I mentioned to the larger group, I'm going to be sending a copy of my PowerPoint. So if you want to follow the process in my PowerPoint rather than the 17 pages I sent you, you'll be able to do that as well. I'm going to go ahead and click on that link, but I have a feeling you're not going to see it, so I'm going to reshare my screen. And now you should be seeing, there we go, a page that is devoted to sending an inquiry to the archive. I'm going to scroll down. Here's information about what the Arelson archivist will be researching for you. Keep scrolling, and here's where you click on go to the inquiry form. And here's where you start to fill out the information online. So you don't have to print anything out or mail anything in. It couldn't be easier. So first information about you, then whatever information you have about the person you're searching for. And you'll be asked for the variations of names under which this person might have been known. So be as helpful as you can, because if you want the information to come back to you quickly, then it's necessary to fill out the form as completely as you can. And they make it easy on the web that you don't have to keep adding your personal information. It's saved, and then you just add the next person and the next person and the next person. I see a couple of your faces online. Am I making sense so far? Okay. All right. I see a couple of people nodding at me. I think the rest of you might have nodded off, but that's okay. So let's take let's take a look at one other thing about Arelson before we go to another resource. I can't stress enough that there's always new information coming online. You know, just when you thought it was safe to go in through the water, just when you thought it was safe to say, I'm done with my family tree, we know that's never true. There's always another branch of the family tree, and there's always something new. So if you want to see what has been going on since the last time I was at Arelson, you can click on this link. But as I said, I have it on my calendar every 3 years. I submit a new inquiry, and I check to see if there's something new in online as well. All right, so that's where we're going to start. The next thing we're going to do is to take a virtual trip to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, which also has an incredible repository of information about the Holocaust. You wouldn't think that a repository in America would necessarily have records from overseas, but man, oh man, does it ever. It's got a massive archive, and not just documents, but artifacts and incredible photographs and oral histories. They have a research center that is used by scholars worldwide. They host the Holocaust Survivor and Victims Database. So when survivors came to the United States, many of them wound up in these books, indicating that they had registered someplace that registration was picked up by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and their names were put in this book. This is kind of a coordinating and educational hub in the United States. I'm sure many of you have been to Washington, D.C., and let me suggest to you that if you haven't, it is just a train ride from Philadelphia to go down to the Holocaust Museum. Make sure that you budget a couple of days to be at the museum, first to see the museum, and then a couple more days to just spend in the library with the various resources that are available there. I used to go there once a year up until COVID hit, but now I plan to go back again. I usually go in December when it's kind of quiet. I go straight to the 5th floor of the museum. I don't bother with the exhibits anymore, just to see what else I can find. I usually have a little book, a little diary of the things that I know that the Holocaust Museum might have that I need to go to see because they're not available online. We're going to start with the Holocaust Survivors and Victims Resource Center. This is the center that is staffed, and they're searching for documents in both Arelson and in their own holdings. And if you can't find what you're looking for online, the museum also has research services. They don't charge you anything at all for looking for information for a family member. So it's completely free to survivors, their families, and families of victims. But if you do have a survivor in your family who's trying to document something for compensation, or perhaps you are trying to get dual citizenship, they do bump those inquiries up and give them special priority. Let's take a look at this link. Okay, which will, again, I'm going to have to stop screen sharing and re-screen share. And you'll probably find yourself at this page where, again, you can submit a request. And remember, you've submitted to Arelson, you're going to submit to the Holocaust Museum as well. It couldn't be easier. You just click on Submit a Request. There'll be some questions, very simple questions. These are not lengthy forms. There's some reading here. And if you prefer to do this by mail, it says you could download the form and submit it by mail, but I don't know why anybody would, because we're all anxious to get information, aren't we? Another link is for you to do the research yourself online. And here's where you're going into the survivor and victim database. And notice that you can search for names or you can search for lists. Some of my mother's family came from very small towns in Poland. And while the family names might not come up, I might want to see, are there any lists that might have something to do with the town where they were from, maybe a deportation list. I'm going to go ahead and click on search for names. I've actually already done that. And I've typed in my mother's maiden name, Galas. And you'll notice that I have some choices here about, do I want to use the exact spelling or fuzzy or the soundex system that many Jewish researchers are used to? My mother's maiden name was not all that common, and it was typically spelled Galas. So I'm going to try that first, but then I'll go back and say, how about a fuzzy match? Because maybe Gallas will show up in a record. Or if you've ever heard of the famous Chicago Bears coach, George Hollis, H and G were often substituted for each other in Polish and Russian. So I might use the soundex system as well. Now, when I put in the name Gallus, if I'm looking for somebody specific, obviously I'm going to fill in all of this information, but I can just click on search under the name Gallus. Again, maybe I don't know too much at this point about who were my mother's other family members. And you can see I'm getting the first 25 of 240 matches. And I'm going to go through every single one. Every time we see an underlined term, then this is a hot link where we can get more information. Now, I happen to know that some of these now, I do know now that these are members of my mother. Some of them are members of my mother's family. And you'll notice that it isn't just a very unhelpful list. It can also be a link to a document. For example, this was my mother's favorite brother, Menachem Yehuda Gallus. And if I click on his name, I'm going to get information that has been transcribed from whatever document exists in the repository. It says he was a male, here's his birthday, here's the street he lived on. This was actually the ghetto address. This was the address the family lived in before the ghettoization of Łódź or Lodz, which was then renamed the Littmannstadt Ghetto. And then it says, do I want a digitized copy of the form? Well, do I ever? I mean, it's great to see the information I'm going to see, but I want to see the actual form. So I'm going to hit document request, fill in this very simple information, and then you would think it's going to take a while to get that information. But in fact, once you hit send the request, check your email. And again, Marilyn, can you tell me if you can see my email right
Yes.
now?
Yes.
Okay. You'll notice that something came in. This was something I did about a half an hour before our program started. It took 3 minutes for this note to come in. Holocaust survivors. I'm going to click on my email. And here are 2 documents from record group 15. I'll just click on the first one. Oh my God. You know, I've had this card now for 15 years, but every time I see it, it still hurts. This is my uncle's ghetto identity card. We're going to come back to it in just a moment. But, you know, when I first started, when I was 10 years old, writing to the Red Cross, having to get my letter translated into German, sent to Germany. It would take years before I would get anything back. And often what I got back was nothing of any note, just a German letter saying we couldn't find anything. And now to get something as precious as a photograph back in less than 5 minutes just amazes me. If you ever wonder about the value of technology, There's a great example. Okay. You might be wondering, what's the point of writing for help from both the Holocaust Museum and from the US HMM? Well, I do enjoy very much finding things on my own. And as I pointed out to you, you can do a lot of that on Arrowson and here at the museum. Um, but it's a good idea to have professionals who are willing to give you help to dig through the records that, yeah, may be online, but maybe aren't online yet. And you might be thinking, are you going to get different information from one resource than the other? I wondered the same thing. So I wrote to one of the librarians at the Holocaust Museum, Joellen Decker. She's been absolutely instrumental to me. She and Megan Lewis in helping me find information. And their answer was absolutely yes, there is a difference. So you want to write to both. What what Joe Ellen said is we're able to search the millions of records we've indexed within our own holdings that are not at the ITS. Remember, ITS is the Arrowson records. For example, the Survivor and Victims Resource Database has several indexes, and in some cases, linked documents to the index record. We also search through the ITS database when we receive a research request, as well as online resources. So if you're getting the sense there's a lot of redundancy and duplication, the answer is, well, yes, there is, and who cares? Okay, so you get 2 or 3 copies of the same record. I think it's better to make sure that you're duplicating your efforts rather than missing something. Joe Ellen went on to say, if someone had asked ITS and us, we get a duplicate record, and then we check only our other resources. But of course, sometimes the reports are behind, and we do the same search in the ITS collections again. But that's not really a problem for us. We're happy to work on them. Typically, we search all the resources at our disposal in order to find additional information about individuals. And I hope that email back to me gives you a sense of how incredible these individuals are who spend their days and sometimes their nights looking for the people who were murdered or otherwise who perished in the Holocaust. These are very dedicated individuals. Now, let me show you some of the types of records you might get by doing your work at with the Arrowson Archives and with the Holocaust Museum. What you're looking at here is a record of my father's internment. His name was Tibor Monk. He was born in Újpest, which is the first suburb north of Budapest. And here is the date he was born, the 21st of January, 1925. He would have been almost 101 had he lived. And here is his concentration camp number. Now, this is not the same thing as a tattoo number. Somebody had mentioned that a little bit earlier. Generally speaking, the only people who received tattoo numbers were those people who were thought to be worthy of labor in Auschwitz. Most of the people who went to Auschwitz, particularly in 44 and 45, did not get a number because they were immediately gassed. This is also an outside folder that was created by the Arrowson Archives. It tells me there are 3 documents in here, 1 card, and this is just my father's file from Mittelbau, which was a concentration camp in Germany, sometimes referred to as Dora Nordhausen, although Dora Nordhausen was really a subcamp of Mittelbau. And here is one of his outside folders from concentration camp Flossenburg. Between my mother and father and the rest of their family, I think my parents hit all the high spots during the Holocaust. Many, many, many different concentration camps. And when you think that recently reported there were about 7,500 concentration camps, death camps, and slave camps, you know that we haven't unearthed everything just yet. Inside the Flossenburg folder was an index card that told me the date of my father's arrival in Flossenburg, the 9th of November, 1944. It tells me that he was being taken next to Mittelbau on the 4th of December of 44, so I'm able to put together a timeline. It tells me that he's a Hungarian Jew. Again, his birth date, it says that he was single, and his occupation, shoemaker. I think we all know what that means. He was a shoemaker, which kind of surprised me because my father was, when I knew him, was never into any kind of tedious or even craft-worthy type of labor. So again, this is a T&D file, a tracing and documentation file. Also, in my father's records at Arrowson was a list. Remember, I said that you can check both places for lists. And here's a list that is a list of people in the Belka Kaserne, which was a subcamp of Dora Nordhausen. I didn't know anything about the Belka Kaserne. That actually means the Belka Barracks. And when I started to look through, I was sent the entire list. I was able to find my father near the top of the second page. And of course, I had no idea what the Belka Kaserne was. I didn't even know that much about Dora Nordhausen, although this was the place in Germany where the slaves, Jewish slaves from many countries, were forced to go into the mountains where the Nazis had drilled out tunnels and to build the V-2 rockets that were supposed to be used to bomb England. Some of the bombs worked. My father said anything that he worked on never worked and never made it over to England. But as you might imagine, the conditions in this slave camp are hard to describe. But my father became very ill at the end of his time in Dora Nordhausen. The Americans were starting to land on the beaches. Americans were flying over this part of Germany, and the Nazis became so terrified that they took some of the men, including my father, about 1,500 men, and separated them from the ones who could still work, rounded them up, put them in some kind of a barracks, surrounded it with barbed wire, and stopped feeding them and left them to die while they took shelter inside the mountains. I later read a book by a man who was part of the American division that liberated Belka Kaserne, and he described what he saw as a room full of corpses. And then he said some of the corpses started to move, and one of those corpses was my father. And those incredible American boys must have been overwhelmed by what they saw, what they smelled. But they took those survivors and they took them to an American hospital near Frankfurt am Main, where my father not only started to recover, but he also met my mother. So this list started me on an incredible chain of research to find out my dad's story, because like many survivors, not all survivors, but like many survivors, he did not talk about his experience. And when I would ask him, because I was certainly curious, he would go, Shah, Shah. So I had to find out a lot about my father's Holocaust journey by doing this work. Sadly, after he passed away, I have so many questions I would have loved to have asked my father. My mother also has a lot of records in Arrowson and in the Holocaust Museum. These are some of her cards indicating that she was writing to the ITS saying, here's where I am. If any family members show up, let them know. So this is a card that says that she was actually in Zalsheim when this card was produced, near Frankfurt. Okay, this was a DP camp. And great genealogical information here, her birth date, where she's from, and her father's name, Abram Galus, and her mother's name, Hinda Devora. I'm Deborah Hinda, and my grandmother's maiden name, Dobrzinska. So if I didn't know that information, here of all places, I'm getting them from the Arrowson records. Here's another card that my mother clearly filed after she'd already come to the United States and settled in Skokie, which is a little shtetl right outside of Chicago. A lot of survivors came to Skokie. Eventually, 1 in 6 households in Skokie housed at least one Holocaust survivor. This also tells you what her new married name is. One of the things my mother was very sad about was that she didn't think if she had any surviving family that they would be able to find her because her name had changed and she had also come to the United States. But here she is looking for two of her brothers, Chaim and Fischel, their birthdays. It says brother here and some other T&D information. Here's another card. Again, very similar, telling us where my mother was at a certain time, so I can put together some kind of a timeline. This card says that my mother's name appeared on a list that was published in Prague and in Czechoslovakia. So my mother was clearly trying to get her name out there so that in the event that any of her family members came to look for her, that she could somehow be found. Here was another very meaningful list given to me by Erelson. This is a list of patients in Salzwedel. My mother was in a slave labor camp in the end of the war in April. The Americans liberated that camp. My mother was one of the people taken by a jeep to the local hospital. And there's her name, spelled a slightly different way, but there it is. And it tells me that my mother was in this German hospital from April 19th of 45 for about 6 weeks till the early June, and that she had a bill of $218.55. And I hope to God my mother never paid it. I really do, even though she was really good about her debts. So that was a fascinating card. And I did get into the background of Salzwedel, this little town in Germany, and what was going on during the war. I went to the place where the slave camp used to be. There's now a plaque honoring the women who were in that camp. Here's some registration cards. At the end of the war, Jewish survivors, and there were about 1 million who were stateless. Europe was absolutely chaotic. But there was an effort by the Allies to register everyone. So this is an Allied Expeditionary Force Assembly registration card. And with any luck, you'll be able to find one for your family member as well. This one is actually written in my mother's hand. I'd recognize that handwriting anywhere. But there were other cards as well. And they tell a story of my mother and later my father, because they met again together after the war. They were recovering in a German hospital. They went to various DP camps in Germany. And what they were trying to do, or at least my mother was trying to do, was get to Palestine. And in the documentation, it says the British say, no, my parents were in the British zone first. And if you know anything about post-war history, the British were as cruel, in my view, as the Nazis. I'm not exaggerating. The British were incredibly cruel to the Jews who were in these DP camps. Did you know that Bergen-Belsen was open for 5 years after the war was over? Fornwald was a DP camp that was open for 7 years after the war, largely because many of the British DP camps, the British simply wouldn't let the Jews out. Which is why my parents wound up later on getting to an American DP camp where they were allowed to freely travel. Here my mother's asking for, well, if you won't let me go to Palestine, how about Australia? And I have other cards that say, well, how about Great Britain? How about Canada? And each time I have a card that says, no, 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 we're not letting you go. But eventually, thanks to President Truman, and an executive order that he issued at the end of World War II, my parents in December got the word that Truman was taking 20,000 stateless people, 5,000 of them or so were Jews, and they got on the first ship they could get to in July of 1946. And this tells you where they were going. I actually went to this little tenement building to see where they wound up. It says that my mother spoke Polish, Hungarian, and German. Well, of course, she had to learn German, and she learned Hungarian because she fell in love with my dad, and they didn't want to speak German to each other. So she learned Hungarian, which is a very difficult language. And there's other wonderful information on this card. I'm hoping that you'll be able to find some as well. Now, in addition to getting these cards and documents, let's not forget that the Holocaust Museum in Washington has other kinds of records. Look over here. When I saw there were 33,000 photographs, one of the things, I did not have any photo of my mother's family when I started this research, except for a photo of her oldest sister. And I thought, well, you know, who knows? I'm just going to look through all of the photos of the Lodz ghetto and see if I can find anybody I think might have been a family member, because I'm not sure what they look like. I had a few descriptions of my grandfather, that all of the Gallus men were tall. My mother said they were all Amazons. Those were her words. Her father always wore a hat. I had very little information, but I did know that my grandfather's work was leather. He was a leather wholesaler in Lodz. And I know that the Lodz ghetto was the longest surviving ghetto during World War II. The Germans closed it up. They liquidated it in August, and they had Jews in these various slave factories throughout Lodz. So on a lark, I typed into the search engine just for photographs now. There were 120 photographs of the Lodz ghetto, and I typed in Lodz ghetto leather. And take a look at what popped up. A photo from 1941 from a work factory, leather. And I looked at these men and a couple of women in this photo, and I thought, first of all, this is the beginning. This is really the beginning of the war, isn't it? Poland was invaded in September of 39. People were forced into the ghetto in the beginning, January of 1940. And I thought I could be looking at members of my mother's family and not even know it. But then later, I got this card, which was my mother's brother. And I compared it to every single person in this photo. And while I'll never be 100% sure, I think that's my uncle in this photo. What do you think? I'm going to come back to this ID card because there's some details here that are very important. But I want you to take a look not only at the person I believe is my uncle. I think this man over here is my grandfather. I'll never know for sure. I know that he had a white beard, that he was tall, and both of these men are tall. They are sitting next to each other. They're holding a piece of leather pelt. This man is wearing a hat. It's the best I can do. And I'm just going to hope that that is what I found. And another reason I believe that it might be my grandfather is that through other research that I did many years later, I discovered that this is my grandfather's brother, Jacob Gallus. So I know this is Jacob. I think this is his brother, my grandfather, and my uncle. Again, I'll never know for sure, but at this point, I'm about 90% confident. This is, again, what these records can do. They can help you fill in a narrative and also validate some of the stories that you might have heard from survivors or from family members. Again, the Holocaust Museum has a lot of resources online. One of the things they do to get background is to go to their website and look at the 4 volumes that they have online describing the major concentration camps, the ghettos, and 700 persecutory sites all over Europe and nearby in Europe. And there are other books coming as well, and they're going to be available online as well. Let me show you why these resources online are so important. Sometimes you find out that your family member was in a very obscure subcamp. Again, there were 7,500 camps minimum throughout Europe. And if you go to these various encyclopedias and look up the name of the camp, as I did here, Salzwedel, you will find vetted, very well researched information about that camp. And I was able to find information about how my mother got from Auschwitz to Bergen-Belsen to Salzwedel, documented right here in this one paragraph. And for those of you who are footnote and bibliography people, you know who you are. Every section of research has extensive notes. So if you want to go even further down the rabbit hole and read more about these rather nuanced areas of history, you're going to be able to do it with these encyclopedias. And as I mentioned, there are 3 more editions coming online in the very near future. You can certainly go out and buy them, but they're over $100 each. My guess is it would even be easier to look at them online because they're much more searchable. And let me also suggest that there's nothing like going to the Holocaust Museum. It is an incredible museum to experience. There are people who go there who are bona fide scholars, they're authors, they're genealogists, other researchers who are doing their work there. The library on the 5th floor is the most extensive library I've ever seen on the Holocaust. Books you wouldn't even know existed unless you either went there or were able to go online and look for a particular book. But you know how it is when you sometimes go to a bookstore, you find a book you didn't even know existed. That's the experience you're going to have at the museum as well. Plus, you'll find the archivists who will help you do research and explain the forms to you. And many of them are thankfully multilingual. So again, I want to encourage you to first go to Arelson. Second, make sure you go to the Holocaust Museum. Again, if you can go to both places in person, great. But there are people across the seas and in Washington who will be able to help you as well. Even though I didn't give high priority to the Red Cross in my 17-page handout, I do think it's important that you contact your local Red Cross or go to their website and apply for any documentation that the Red Cross might have. There was a time when these files that the Red Cross had were private, but they released those to the public in 1990, but you still have to ask for the documentation. And I don't know if the process is the same. When I applied in 2010, I applied back in the 1960s, and the Red Cross was absolutely useless. But in 2010, it was very easy to apply to the Red Cross and find out about any documentation. You can certainly contact your local Red Cross chapter, and a caseworker can help you fill out the tracing form. And what the Red Cross does is they work with the Red Cross and Red Crescent chapters around the globe, as well as Mogen David Adom in Israel and other archives and organizations. And they've got stuff that no one else seems to have. It could take a year till you hear back. Again, back in the day, they didn't write back at all. My father would just shrug his shoulders because he didn't trust the Red Cross after the war to do anything right. But I got very, very lucky in an application to the Red Cross for some help. In February 2010, I got a lead that one of my mother's first cousins may have survived the war. I should back up by telling you, my mother said to her dying day that she was the only survivor of her family. But when I started to do the family tree and I saw how many cousins, first cousins she used to have, and how many aunts and uncles she used to have, I said, yes, we know 6 million Jews died, but isn't there a chance that more than my mother survived? And I found, in fact, that she did have several first cousins that survived, although by the time I found out about it, of course, it was too late. So I wanted to find out more about this first cousin. And one of the things I did was contact the Red Cross that month. And I was shocked that in 2 months, I received documents that stated that at least as of 1964, 50 years prior to my search, my cousin who had a name, Sipra, was alive and living in Israel. You could have knocked me flat to tell me that my mother had a first cousin that had gone to Israel. This was the form that was brought over to me personally to my home. Apparently, at that time in 2010, the Red Cross thought I might faint dead away. So they would come to you with the form, make sure you don't faint, and go through the form with you. And what it turned out was Sipra, notice that she spelled her name a little bit differently here, was going by the married name of Rafeli. She was born a Gallus. She had been married to someone by the name of Rubenstein, and she had been born in this little village of Yezho, which was where my mother's ancestral family came from. And there was all this incredible information on that form. But the part that, of course, I noticed right away was that at the time in 1964, she was living, notice down here at the bottom, in a kafar Hasidim, which was apparently a very religious place, not a kibbutz exactly, more like a farm near Haifa. And then on the second page of the form, I was stunned to find out that I had a second cousin because Sipra had a son. But unfortunately, this form went on to say that her son died in the Battle of Gush Etzion in the War of Independence before she was able to return to Israel. It's a long story that I found out about. It was an incredible experience finding out what happened to Sipra. I was lucky to have a former college roommate in Israel that did some research on that side of the world. But if you go to the Red Cross, you too might be able to get some information. And again, I'm going to give you a copy of this URL so that you can fill out the form, or you can just Google Red Cross tracing form and it'll take you to this page. And again, it's not very complicated to fill out the forms for each and every one of the family members that you're looking for. Now, remember, if you're growing your family tree at the same time as finding out this information, you're going to be doubling back on all of these resources and filling out more forms later. The fourth source, again, an incredibly important source of information for Holocaust researchers is Yad Vashem, which is an incredible museum in Jerusalem. If you haven't been there, put it on your bucket list. It is considered as the global anchor of Holocaust documentation and the largest and most authoritative Holocaust archive. It holds pages of testimony. You heard, I think it was Marilyn or Felicia referred to the pages of testimony for more than 5 million victims. These are often handwritten documents written by people who survived about people who didn't. And by looking at these pages of testimony, not only will you find out the fate of your family member, you might find out something about the person who submitted that page of testimony who still might be alive. There are also survivor testimonies. Most of these are housed in Yad Vashem, so you'd have to go there. And they are not only in audio, some of them are written, some of them are on video. There's lots of different kinds of documentation, again, completely different from what you might find at the Holocaust Museum or at the Arrowson. There are photographs, artifacts, personal papers. Some of these are on exhibit at the museum. Most of them are not. Most of them are in a little corner of the museum where the library is. And of course, if you write to them, they will be more than helpful. They do this for scholars who consider Yad Vashem the ultimate repository of their research. They also have a database very similar to the one that Washington, D.C. has of survivors, but they also have information about the people who saved or tried to save Jews and others. The Righteous Among the Nations is also a beautiful walkway in the museum, giving honor to those who were brave enough not to be complicit with the Nazis, but also to outright defy them. There's a very good public searchable database. We're going to go to it in a minute, but I want to remind you that when when the pages of testimony were first written, there was no thinking forward of how genealogists would find these pages and this other documentation interesting. If genealogists had been the ones to create the form called the pages of testimony, we would have been asking for a lot more information. So as you start to take a look at the resources at Yad Vashem, and we're going to go to the collections in just a moment, I want to remind you that what you find may be lacking in depth in terms of what you might have wanted to know. But let's take a look without going to the internet just yet. When you do go to the internet, you're going to go to a page that winds up looking like this. And again, you want to make sure that if you are monolingual like I am, that you click on the English button because thankfully, the pages of testimony, lots of other data are now available in languages that people speak from other parts of the world. And you can see, you can put in a last name, first name, place. You can also just put in a last name like Gallus, see what pops up. But if your name is Cohen, I'd recommend that you refine your search. You can also do an advanced search, and I'm going to explain that in just a moment as well. So when I put in the name Gallus, and again, notice I just did kind of a sloppy search, Gallus, and I put in the name of the town Lodz because I did want to just find out about the Polish people named Gallus. What popped up in this search, 37 items. I'm getting lots of different kinds of first names, a little bit of information about birth years where possible, and the type of information that I'm going to find. Sometimes a name is just on a list. It says she's murdered. There's a map of where Lodz is. But the ones that I am initially going to be interested in, if I'm just starting my search, are the pages of testimony, because these are incredibly personal. Notice down here also there's a card file. So there's lots of different kinds of things that you can find, but I think many of you will want to go directly to any pages of testimony. And when you click on the link to the page of testimony, you might find something that looks like this. Let me give you a moment to take it in. Now, again, the minute I see this, just looking at it globally, I know it's my mother's handwriting. I know she filled it out. I didn't know that my grandmother's name would have been Dvoira, which is, of course, Deborah and my name. So I have her maiden name here. And this is going to be a card that tells me that my grandmother died, was murdered. It says her husband's name. This is my grandfather. And this is the exact date of her death. They both died in Auschwitz. They were taken directly to the gas chamber. And if I was not sure about that, my mother says in her very blunt English language, with her blunt language skills, put in the gas chamber. She didn't say murdered. She didn't say died. She told people the way it was. And just in case I didn't know that Auschwitz used to be called Auschwitz, that's the Polish name for that town. There it is. And it gives me some contact information about this person who I know is my mother. Notice that this her name is no longer Munn. She divorced my dad, remarried. And at least it gives me an address so that if I can do some kind of cross-reference to an address in Skokie, I might be able to find this person who filled out this particular page of testimony. And it's got her signature as well. So again, this was a very early page of testimony form. Today's forms are all digital, they're online, and I hope that every time you find a family member who perished in the Shoah, that you will fill out a page of testimony and help give lie to what the Nazis and the neo-Nazis said never happened. And if you can, maybe you can find out who submitted that record, and they may have a lot more information about other members of your family who you didn't even know existed, much less survived. And one of the ways you can do that is on the initial page to search on Yad Vashem, there's an advanced search function. So you'll remember again, we went to the central database, and there's a place where you can click on advanced search and look not for somebody who died in the Holocaust, but who's submitting those names. So let's take a look and see how we would do that, because this is kind of I think, a technique that many of you would want to also try. Let me go ahead and reshare my screen. So this is what the page looks like now, a little bit different than what you saw my PowerPoint slides. So again, you could search the database, you can search documents, photo collections, libraries, put in a person's name. I'm going to put in my mother's name, Gallus. And I'm sorry, her first name was Felicia, but again, it could be Fega, it could be any number of names, but Gallus is going to be critical. And what's here important is I want to do an advanced search. I'm not searching for the fate of my mother in the database. I know that she survived. I want to put her name in right here where it says submitter details. I'm going to put in my mother's name and her first name. And if I don't find anything, I'm going to try Munn and Brenner, but I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And when I do, I'm going to get back a list of all the pages of testimony my mother filled out. And if I didn't know that my mother had a sister by the name of Rivka, who was married when the war broke out, and whose married name was Leffelholtz, I will now by clicking on this link and reading that card. And my mother very often duplicated her work. I know where I get it from. She would fill out these pages of testimony every time they changed. Because again, she just thought if it's possible, any of these folks survived, they would be able to find me. So I was able to find an incredible amount of information about what my mother knew about her family members from these pages of testimony. The lists are very helpful. You might also find that something of meaning in the record, other records that are being held by Yad Vashem as well. By the way, some of the information you find at Yad Vashem may not be something readily understood, so you will want to stay on that website and download the guide to genealogical resources and research at Yad Vashem. Every one of these places that we've been to have a guide that help you understand the information that you're taking a look at. And again, I'm a big believer in getting your feet on the ground. So if you haven't been to Yad Vashem, how many of you have, by the way? How many of you have been to Yad Vashem? You could either, well, I guess you're going to have to raise your virtual hand for me and let me know. Okay. Just in walking around Yad Vashem, you're going to find information, a lot of you've been there, that is very helpful and also will help you process some of the feelings of grief and loss that you're having. The Valley of the Communities has stones for every little village and shtetl and big city where Jews were taken. The museum is a wonder. There is a memorial cave. And I knew this existed, but if I hadn't, it would have been an incredible find for me. My mother left breadcrumbs wherever she went. She left breadcrumbs, hoping that a family member would find her. She put names on memorial walls anywhere she went. Miami, this was the one in Jerusalem. Anywhere she lived, the Holocaust Museum in Skokie. And you'll notice here that I've got a little family tree, don't I? And notice again my mother's comment, dedicated by the sole survivor. With her first name, her family name, and her new married name. She didn't use the name Munn here, but it wouldn't have mattered at the time that she was creating this memorial for her family, and a grave essentially, really, because she didn't have a grave for her family. Maybe somebody would have been able to find her. I'm sure the library has changed since I took this photo. It looks like a rather small library, but it is a large, significant library of holdings. And one of the surprises I had when I was there back in 2013 was I was exhausted. Had been a long day of research. Had to go back and get some rest, but I said, okay, there's a computer here. Let me just do a real quick look. And you know how it is in genealogy. Sometimes serendipity is your best friend. I typed into this rather primitive search engine the name Gallus, and what popped up was my mother's first cousin Sipra's testimony, how she went from Lodz, Poland with her husband and her little boy to Siberia, and what happened to them in Siberia, and how she was separated. Her husband died in Siberia, and her son became one of the children of Tehran. If you've never read that incredible story about 500 children in Siberia being picked up by the United Jewish Agency and being taken as orphans to what was Palestine at the time. It's a remarkable story, and I didn't realize that my little second cousin, who sadly had died as a soldier, I didn't know anything of his backstory, and here was his mother's testimony in what is now a digitized, translated recollection, and one that I could easily get online, but I had to go there to find it. Again, sometimes it's the power of geography that really pulls you in. If you haven't looked at Jewish Gen's Holocaust databases, of course, that's an incredible database for you. There are now more than 6 million records from approximately 200 different databases that are all feeding into Jewish Gen, where you can do a search by any number of different variables and find information about your family member. If you go to Jewish Gen, the page no longer looks like this, but I think many of you remember this older page, and I'm looking at a specific database within Jewish Gen, the Jewish Gen's Holocaust database. But you can just do a global search these days, and if your family member shows up in any one of the Holocaust databases, it'll show up on that search. Now, again, as of July of last year, um, you can see that the records, the Holocaust records, are growing all the time. So put it on your calendar to go back and check and see if there's anything new, not only to Jewish Gen, specifically to the Holocaust database. You're never really done with your research. Now, back in 2008, databases were much more primitive in terms of their holdings, much more primitive in the way they looked. I wanted to replicate what I saw as best I could here when I put in the name Gallus into Jewish Gen's database I think it was around 2008. And this incredible list came up of 773 matches to the name Gallus. And as you might imagine, I went through every single one, even the ones that didn't seem all that relevant, like Hungary, that side of the family was from Poland. But I went through every single one to see, is there a Gallus here that may be one of my mother's? And I focused, of course, on the Lodz Ghetto list, where I did find my family members. But then I went to the Krakow Ghetto list, and I'm thinking, well, this is a long shot because none of my family was in the Krakow Ghetto. But when I clicked on that link, I found this. And I looked at the name Bluma in Israel, and I'm scratching my head thinking, didn't my mother have a brother by the name of Sarah Blumka? Maybe this is the same. And didn't she have a little brother who might have been born in 1925, but his name was Srulik? Well, I was so dumb, uneducated back then. I didn't know that Srulik was a nickname for Israel. It even took me a while to put the two together. Israel, Srulik. Okay, so I called up my sister, and I asked her. I said, "Did Mom have sister and brother?" She said, "Yes, they did." I said, 1915, 1925. Yeah, they did. And I said, "Okay, great. What are they doing in Krakow?" She said, "Well, don't you remember Mom was visiting her older sister when the war broke out? Mom's oldest sister, Rivka, had a baby at the end of August who would have been a couple weeks old, and Mom went down to babysit. And then when she came back, the war was already started. She told her parents the Nazis in Krakow were nicer than the Nazis in Lodz. They were more gentlemanly. So my grandparents sent Bluma and Israel down to Krakow. So when I clicked on Krakow Ghetto, knowing that this might be a very fruitful endeavor for me, the Krakow Ghetto up here in the blue was a link. I'm told, okay, here's what the database has. 19,000 registration forms. And apparently, if we go back to the previous slide, there's some kind of microfilm. Remember microfilm? Some kind of microfilm. These are some kind of numbers that indicate there's information about my aunt and uncle that is being held by the Jewish Historical Institute. Now, back when I was looking at this, the Holocaust Museum didn't have their hands on this record, but the JHI did in Warsaw. So I emailed, we did have email back in 2009. I emailed the JHI and I said, "Can you tell me what these holdings are?" And the JHI archivist told me, "Well, we have identity cards from Krakow and you might be interested in them." And she said, some of these, and again, she's writing to me an email in Polish. So I'm using Google Translate a little bit now to figure out what she's saying. And some of them have photographs. Well, I could feel my heart rise into my throat. And I immediately emailed back after figuring out how to translate. And I said, "I will pay you any kind of money to send me what you have on my aunt and uncle." And I said, "Whatever it takes to FedEx these, I'll pay you any kind of money." She said, she wrote back, she said, "Oh, no. There's no charge for this." And she said, "You'll have them tomorrow." I was still thinking about the old-fashioned days where you had to wait months and months and months to get records. Well, the next day, I was teaching my students, I teach adults, and during my break, I clicked on my email and I saw that there was email from the JHI, and it was probably somewhat of a mistake for me to opened that email because the first thing I saw was this. And again, much like that photo of my uncle, I I was absolutely stunned. I didn't think I was going to be able to go back to the classroom because not only was I looking at my aunt's, my mother's second oldest sister's identity card from Krakow. It told me where she lived, what she was doing in the ghetto, and of course, her picture. And when I looked at this picture, I knew this was my mother's sister. There was no question of it. And all I could do was cry that I had a picture of my mother's sister that she had lost or never seen. And then, of course, there was another email from the JHI with my mother's youngest brother's picture. Heartbreaking, just heartbreaking. And I found out what happened to them. They were killed in a street action in 1942. I went to the mass burial site in the little town where they had been taken and shot. But I was glad to have a picture. I remember when my mother was dying that she had started to call me, she started to speak Polish again, and she was calling me Sarah Blumka. So I was glad to see this picture of her. And I was glad to have this picture of her youngest brother, who she called the baby of the family because he was. Also, Jewish Gen yielded me this card. About 2 months after I had these pictures of my aunt and uncle, the Jewish Gen had digitized the Ludge identity cards. And not only did I have this remarkable picture of my uncle, my mother's middle brother, but his strong signature, what he did, where he lived in the ghetto in 1941, and a partial story of his fate. This was the brother my mother was with in the ghetto. The other siblings had been dispersed to one place or another. But you can see, perhaps if you lean in, that there's a stamp on this card that says Transport 69. And I was lucky when I wrote to the Jewish Gen discussion group that on the other end of the other side of the pond, there was a German researcher who was very interested in the Lodz ghetto, and he knew exactly what Transport 69 was. That my uncle had been taken to a work camp in Czestochowa. So, unlike the information my mother had about her brother, she had believed that he had died in Buchenwald. I knew that he hadn't been taken to Buchenwald immediately, that he had been taken to what was called the place of yellow death, where the Jews were forced to work with nitric acid. I read all about this place. And from there, he was taken to Buchenwald. And I also found out from Jewish Gen that he was alive at the end of the war. Based on this card, which is written in Czech, he was on a death march to Theresienstadt. He survived the terrible epidemic there of, I can't remember what disease so many of the survivors had there. It wasn't cholera, it was some, and it might have been typhus, but he survived that, and he was given this transportation card to get out of Theresienstadt and to go wherever he was going to go. I did also find out that he made it as far as Celle, Germany. I believe he was on his way back to Łódź to find out if anybody had survived. And sadly, for the last 15 years, I've not been able to find what happened to him. More about that a little bit later. So Jewish Gen has been doing a lot of work in linking various databases, including the USC, the University of Southern California Shoah Foundation. A lot of my mother's friends and my mother did a testimony, a video testimony for Steven Spielberg's group. I think a lot of you are very familiar with Steven Spielberg's interest in the Shoah, especially after he did Schindler's List, and he decided to support the videotaping of every survivor who was willing to give his or her story. There are now 55,000 video testimonies. And even if your family member didn't do a video, chances are someone from his or her town did one. So you might be listening not only to survivors, but also witnesses and liberators and rescuers. And they're very easy to find because you can, if all you know is this person was in a certain place, a camp or a ghetto or a town, or you only want to listen to testimonies in English, like I would, or there's an event. Let's say that you know that your family member was in Sosnowiec in that terrible gathering of people in the soccer camp. You can search by that event. So even if it's not a family member telling you about what happened at that terrible place, you can listen to a survivor tell that story and flesh in more detail about the experience that your survivor, that your ancestor had. You can very easily search this archive. Again, Jewish Gen will help you do it because the testimonies are now being completely indexed by what the survivors are saying. And this is, again, the primary global repository of survivor voices that you may, again, get picked up by Jewish Gen. As a matter of fact, when I typed in my mother's name the last time, and this was just a couple of years ago, I got the list of things I would expect, but I also noticed that, okay, Jewish Gen is now linking testimony with where somebody's mentioned the name Gallus, there are 12 records. So you can directly link from Jewish Gen, or you can go to the USC Shoah Foundation Institute directly and find those testimonies. Again, 32 languages, 56 countries, pretty easy to not only search, but in many cases, you can actually listen to the testimony from the comfort of your living room seat. I'm going to go ahead and click on this link, and it will take me to, let me take you there as well, take you to the USC website. And let me just confirm that you can see that I'm on the USC Shoah Foundation website. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
it is.
Okay, great. So up here at the very top, you can do a search by name, or perhaps like I had a specific number, you can do that, but I'll just go ahead and I went to the wrong link. I apologize. I'm going to go back and search by name, and you can just simply type in a name if you have it, or if you have a place, that's fine too. Let me try this one more time. That's funny. It's not quite letting me do this the way I was doing it earlier. Okay, we'll try that. Felicia Brenner, Sipra Brenner. There's my mom. And I can, because my mother's tape is public, I can just click on it and we can listen to my mother tell the story.
Had official with him. And consequently, only I and my younger brother Menuchim Yehuda were left with both my parents. Now, in April of 1940,
Okay, that's just a little bit. Notice what's going on over here at the side. The good people of the USC Shoah Foundation have typed up a transcript that has been indexed by any important event or name that my mother might mention. And this is also what Jewish Gen is picking up and is sending me saying there's something with Gallus on this video. I use the resources of the USC a lot, not because I have a lot of testimonies there that are specifically about my family, but to get background about what happened especially in very, very small towns. My brother-in-law is a child survivor and a child of survivors. We keep the Holocaust in the family, so to speak. And he came from a little town called Dobromil. His testimony isn't there. His mother's testimony, sadly, isn't there. But there are testimonies about what happened in Dobromil. This is a little town in what is now the Ukraine. If for any chance you happen to stumble upon a videotape that isn't available immediately, you can do a search on the site and say, well, where could I go to listen to the testimony? I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, so I've gone to Duke University and UNC Chapel Hill to listen in. And in Pennsylvania, there are a number of universities that will transmit the videotape for you. You just go to the university and put on the headphones. And also there are more testimonies available in the Philly area outside of the ones at USC. So again, I'll provide this list to Marilyn from my PowerPoints a little bit after the program. Lots of different ways. University of Pennsylvania has the USC show videos, but you might want to take a look at what the other holdings are that might be particularly relevant to those of you whose family members, the survivors, came to Philly and might have provided their testimony when they were here. Ancestry also links to the Shoah testimonies now. So you may be getting an email from the Shoah Foundation through your Ancestry subscription. I noticed a lot of you were saying that Ancestry has a library edition. Sadly, if you go to your local library to use Ancestry and you've got European roots, you're not going to find that Ancestry library edition very meaningful, but you can still sign up for a subscription and you still may wind up getting these kinds of emails saying we found a testimony that might be of interest. Another important place to go, and I'm just going to go very quickly here because we're running out of time and there are so many important resources. I want to just make sure I hit all the high notes. Many of you have seen or heard of Yiskor books. If you haven't, these are memorial books that were written by survivors documenting the history of their destroyed Jewish community. These were privately published and they were compiled by former residents of these towns. And they're little essays, lots of photographs sometimes, and little stories about Yankel, the tavern owner. And that Yankel might be your Yankel. Sadly for me, most of these Yiskor books, the vast majority of them are in Hebrew or Yiddish, but there are a lot of Jewish Gen projects to translate these Yiskor books and put them available online. And I've been lucky to find a few of them. You can just Google or go to this link for the Jewish Gen Yiskor database, and you can find out which of your towns have a translated edition. You can also go online to the New York Public Library, which has a collection of about 730 of them, and 650 of them, the vast majority of them, are available right online. You can see them. If you can't read them, that's a whole other issue. You can also get newly printed copies of the Yiskor book for a fee from the Yiddish Book Center, which is in Massachusetts. And the New York Public Library, by the way, does have a guide to understanding these Yiskor books. When I was working with my brother-in-law, who just turned 80-something, he was a little boy of 4 years old when he and his family started to move, had to run from the Nazis into what is now deep Ukraine, and they wound up in Siberia. And he only knew his mother and father's name. He didn't know anything about anybody else. He did have a sister who had been murdered by the Nazis whose name was Hannah. That's about all he had. And so I wanted to give him as a gift not only his family tree, I wanted to reunite him with his family. I wanted to find out something about the town where his mother and father were married and where they lived. And lucky for me, there is a book by Saul Miller about Dobermill, and it is virtually a Yiskor book. And it has been partially translated by the good folks at Jewish Gen. My brother-in-law's last name is Kramer. Do you see the name Kramer on this page? Turned out that's my brother-in-law's uncle, who described everything that happened to Marty's family, everything. And we found pictures of his great-grandfather and what happened during the war. And we were able to fill in a lot of the missing pieces of information. We even found where Marty's house was, the house they didn't own, but they lived in Dobermill. This took me down an incredible rabbit hole for Marty, and I know he's very grateful. I'm sure many of you have heard of Steve Morse's websites, the One Step Great Steve Morse. He's got a lot of great databases on his website. I bet you can look at this list and see some that you want to check out. I, of course, wanted to find if I had any great-grandparents buried in the Lodge Cemetery. So I looked at this website, and then my eye, when I went back and looked at this again, I saw this database. Well, now I have two parts of my family that were in Siberia. And I figured, why not? Let me check and see if there's any information here about, let's say, Sipora and her little boy and her husband. And sure enough, I used Sipora's married name, Rubenstein. Notice the spelling here. I had to try a lot of different spellings. Usually you can use some kind of sound X, but I couldn't in this one. I tried Rubenstein, Rubenstein. This was more like Rubenstein. And here is my little cousin's father, who died on, I believe he was in this district, yes, in the Vologda district. And here's a card in English and in Polish telling me his fate. So I was able to find what city was Sipora and her little boy and her husband in. I was able to find out what kind of work they did when they were exiled and deported. When they were released, they became part of Anders' army. If you know that story, that's another fascinating one. And I was also able to find out my little cousin's great-grandfather's name, Jacob, as well. Some other resources, Landsmannschaften, I hope I pronounced that right. These are little organizations, not so little sometimes, where people came to their new country after the war and they created a little society for themselves. And if you want to find out if there's something like a Jezhov Landsmannschaften or a Dobromil Landsmannschaften, these people took care of each other. You can find out in this now defunct publication, still available, but it's defunct. Avutenu has a list of all the Landsmannschaften that were in existence in 2012. And there are quite a few people, as you know, after the war who went to Israel. So there's one for the Israeli Landsmannschaften. I went to the one in Israel for the Lodge group, and those men were already in their 90s. And I don't know what happened to all their incredible resources they had in their little rental office. Also do a Google search and check to see, are there any Jewish Gen Kahila pages? I created one for the little town of Yezhov, and I have a lot of information on this little website sponsored by Jewish Gen about where you can go for more information about the Jewish people who were in that town. So check to see if there's a Kahila page for those communities. If you travel at all, I encourage you to go to city synagogues, city cemeteries. They are sometimes a wealth of information. A couple of your colleagues before we started today talked about what you can find on a tombstone. Everywhere my mother went, she had a wall engraved. When she would go to Miami once a year, she found out there was a Holocaust memorial there, and you can see that she is praying in front of a panel that holds the names of her Gallus family members. And I thought very generously, she also added my father's family members who at the time they knew had perished in the Holocaust. So check those places out. Some of those monuments, by the way, are being added to databases. People are transcribing what they see on those walls. When you go to a synagogue, especially a synagogue overseas, they may have a memorial that lists the name of people who died in World War II. This is an early picture of me around 2010 when I went back to my father's city. I didn't even know he was religious, but he was a member of a congregation. He got bar mitzvahed here, and there was a wall of the dead. And you're seeing me point to the panel where my father's name appeared as somebody who died, Tibor Monk, age 19. There's a long story I'll share with you if you're interested a little bit later about why he's on the wall of the dead. There's his father, who I know did die in Mauthausen, Vilmos. And I didn't look at this panel or do anything with it until 10 years later, when I was back in Hungary, made another visit to the same memorial, and I asked my guide there to say these names out loud because I didn't know if any of them were related to me. When he got to this name, Lepotny, it sounded like the name Leopold. Lepotny. This is wife of, or widow of, Leopold. And something jarred in my head, and I thought, I think my dad said his grandfather was a twin, Joseph, and the other twin's name was Leopold. And that sent me on a search for what happened to any of these survivors. I do have Hungarian cousins who I've enjoyed getting to know over the last 15 years. I was in Philadelphia at one of the IAJGS meetings a number of years ago. I was talking to Megan Lewis from the Holocaust Museum. She said, let me do a little search for you, see what I can find. And she said, somewhere there in Stockholm, there's a Wall of the Dead near a synagogue, and it's got the name Gallus on it. And I said, I don't have any relatives in Sweden. Jews in Sweden, it sounds like a Mel Brooks movie. I don't have any. She says, well, here's what I'm reading on our database. There's a Jacob Gallus, a Schiffer Gallus, a Mendel Gallus, and a Moshe Gallus. And I'm thinking, those names are in my family tree. I said, who put those names there? She said, somebody by the name of Simon Gallus and Rose Marie Gallus, who's now married and goes by the name of Goronsky. And I ran out of that Philadelphia hotel as fast as I could, got on a plane back to Raleigh, Durham, and started making phone calls to Stockholm in the middle of the night on Shabbat, trying to find out who are these people. And I did find them. And I do have living cousins in Stockholm, of all places. Again, cemeteries, synagogues, there are plaques there, memorials, and you may find information if these plaques have been indexed in one of the databases we talked about. Otherwise, sometimes you just stumble on these when you're walking around the cemetery and you go, maybe somebody who is related to me put this plaque up there. I discovered some more relatives in Sweden by the name of Popinski. All of the Holocaust Museum in the United States is a wonder, but a lot of cities in the United States have their own Holocaust museums. There's one in the town where I grew up, Skokie, Illinois, the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. They've got lots of information. If you walk around, you'll see my mother's name on a lot of things, her picture and her not a testimony, but just a discussion, a verbal discussion of what life was like for her. So you never know what you're going to find. There are hundreds of Holocaust monuments, memorials, and museums throughout the world. You can go on Wikipedia and find them. So if you're going on a trip, make sure you look to see, is there anything of interest in my Holocaust research? There's also a Wikipedia page of concentration camps and sub-camps. Don't forget to look at the sub-camps as well. There is an Association of Holocaust Organizations, another great repository in Israel. They're not very helpful if you email them. You have to kind of be persistent, but the Central Zionist Archives would be very helpful if you know you had, or you think you have family members that after the Shoah came to Israel. A lot of people changed their names when they came to Israel to something that was more Hebraic, but they will help you find if somebody came in either legally or more likely clandestinely into Israel. And they do have a dedicated section for genealogists. Don't forget looking in books. Go to Google Books, and you might be surprised when you type in a family name or a place that something of interest pops up. In my case, my mother had a cousin by the name of Itchik. She talked a little bit about, she said that he committed suicide, and that was all I knew about him. But I had his name, and I knew he was in Łódź, and there's a very famous book many famous books actually about the Łódź ghetto, but this is perhaps the one that is most descriptive. And I found this passage about Itchik and his wife. There were 3 bridges over the streets in Łódź because the Germans didn't want to have to walk on the same streets as the Jews. So in the ghetto, they built these bridges. And my mother's cousin Itchik jumped off one of the bridges, committed suicide, and his wife jumped off the next day, as you can see here. And the reason for their suicide was given as well. And that is because their children were taken away. In that terrible story of, if you know the Łódź ghetto, Chaim Rumkowski had to take 20,000 people, and he chose to take people who could not work, improve their values. So he took a lot of children, and that's why my cousins committed suicide. Hayes has a lot of great information, and again, lots of great resources. And of late, one of the best things since sliced bread are the 2 ladies, Adina Newman and Jennifer Mendelson, who are taking survivors or their children like me taking our DNA and uploading it to other databases to see if there are any matches between them. Again, they do this at no charge. Please do this. I think it's an important way to find information. It's not the traditional paper trail that we're looking for. We're using new technology. And while they weren't, I had to wait a long time, about 8 months before they got to me. There were more pressing issues. I didn't find any first cousins. I didn't find any trail of my cousin, my uncle Menachem, but I did find some third and fourth cousins. And I'm happy to have any cousins. I'll take any cousins whatsoever. Once you have completed a lot of your research, there's some important things that you can do. One of them, and I'm going to hold you to this personally, and I'm going to come and get you if you don't do this. If you find the fate of one of your family members who was murdered in the Shoah or died some other way related to the Shoah, submit a page of testimony so that other people down the road can find them and they can find you. It doesn't take much to fill out a page of testimony. If you have the know-how or you have a grandson or a granddaughter, ask them to help you create a Facebook page or use some other social media that is publicizing your search. I've got a Facebook page for my uncle. It hasn't proven productive as yet, but I keep posting, hoping that some descendant of my uncle will pop up in the next 20 years and tell me that they're related to me in some way. There are other organizations that will help you publicize your search, such as allgenerations.org. They have a newsletter, and they also take queries and publicize them. I'm so-and-so, I'm looking for anybody who has any information about such and such. In April, which is a Holocaust Remembrance Month, usually the local universities ask people to come in and read the names of the people who were lost or who perished in the Holocaust. I do it every year. Every year, my list of people gets a little bit longer, and so I share that information in this very public forum. Again, I want to go back to as we finish up here, and I'm happy to take your questions to help you understand, and I think you already know the answer to this, about why this is so important, especially now. There are so many young people who have no idea what Auschwitz was. There are so many people who believe the great lie that the Holocaust never happened. Deuteronomy says, "Only guard yourself and guard your soul carefully, lest you forget the things your eyes saw, and lest these things depart your heart all the days of your life, and you shall make them known to your children and your children's children." And why we do this is because the survivors are leaving us. We only have fewer than 1,000 left in the United States. Many of them are too old to share their testimony anymore. And so it's our job to share their stories with others. And as Elie Wiesel said, when you tell the story of a survivor, you become a witness, and everyone who listened to you becomes a witness. The Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai wrote, "Now 2 generations of forgetting have passed, and the first generation of remembering has arrived. Woe to us that already have arrived at remembering, for memories are the hard shell of an empty heart. In a little while, people will walk through fields and cities with something like nature lovers' plant guides in hand, and they'll call to one another, 'Here, I found it. No mistake. Here are the signs. Here is the characteristic color of their eyes and hair. Here is their well-known smile. This is its fragrance and this is its name. This was a friend of a friend. This is a woman of long ago. This one is the image of my father, and this the image of me and you. When you will flower and when you wilt. This is the scientific name. And this is the common name between lovers and friends. And this is the name. This is a name with no person. And this is a person with no name. And this is how it was." You've been such a thoughtful group of people, and it's really an honor to my parents that you have shared in my search, and I certainly hope that you will find your search and the results as gratifying as I have mine. And now let me turn the microphone back over to my friends Marilyn and Mark, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you so much, Debbie. Your talk was just fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
Have another couple of hours, Marilyn?
Yeah. Oh, you know what? And your handout is unbelievable. And I just somebody didn't get it, and Simone, I will email it to you after the meeting. Just wonderful.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Very thorough and very inspiring. Uh, so we do have a couple questions, not too many yet, as people are thinking. And Stephen wrote, let's see, Stephen, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. A lot of this is about people who were sent to concentration camps, at least the first two sites that you talked about, the Arelson Archives, the Holocaust Memorial Museum. But my family were in the what became Soviet influence. It was the Soviet influenced area.
Yeah.
So very few of the people were sent to concentration camps. They were from Northeast Poland, Lithuania, Belarus.
Yeah, they were in labor camps in Russia and Siberia.
Okay,
Mhm.
I don't have knowledge of that. Instead, I have knowledge of locals who either the Nazis themselves marched in and just shot people, or the locals who were sympathetic to Nazis came in and shot people. What kinds of records for those towns might these, like Arelson or similar places have?
Okay, that is a great question. I want to make sure everybody heard it. I am going to take you to a website that I want you to check
Yes.
out. First of all, I do want to just correct the impression that it might be a waste of time to write to the Holocaust Museum or Yad Vashem or any of these because they do have records from Siberia. They do. So it's worth your time to still go through all of those. But you're absolutely right. What happened in Lithuania, Ukraine, Russia is that the Jews were just murdered wholesale and their bodies were dumped into mass graves. This was called the Holocaust by bullets, and it happened well before the Nazis got Auschwitz up and running, right? Now, the person who has done the most amount of good work to find any information about the people is Father Patrick Dubois. Can you see this on the screen now? And
Yes.
he has an organization called Yahad in Unum. I'm just going to go ahead and type that in. He's got a lot of young Ukrainian kids who are finding the death pits in Unum. There we go. There it is. And there we go. He is mapping those places out. They're using all kinds of infrared technology to find out where the bodies are. And where possible, he's documenting the people from that town who might be in those mass graves. And while he might not be able to completely document the individuals in the graves, he's also has his young people taking video testimony of the witnesses to those massacres. And they are naming names. These are people who are maybe 10 years old or 5 years old. They sometimes have a terrific recollection of the massacres, but some of them were 15, some of them were 20 and still alive. And they talk about Leisure Glazier, Larry the glassmaker. They talk about Yunkel. They talk about our family members and what happened to them. And I think that might be a very fruitful place for you to start your search and to find out. And also to go back to, I'd like you to go back to both of the early sites and put in the names of those towns that your people are from and see what lists might exist for those towns.
Okay,
So
thank you. Great.
there. That Yahad and Unum project is unbelievable. Watch some of the videos. What's incredible to me, when the war started in Ukraine, I didn't have a lot of sympathy for the Ukrainians because I had all this stuff in my head about how the Ukrainian, my parents and their friends always argued about who was the worst to the Jews, and the Ukrainians always came out number one. You know, in fact, that's not true, but they were bad. But I did discover a lot of people try to do something in these small towns. You might want to see the movie A Real Pain, which is more or less a documentary about that. And also, Everything is Illuminated
Oh, yeah.
was a fictionalized story, but Jonathan Safran Foer, who wrote the book and then the movie, has a mom, Esther, who lives in Washington, who just did a book about her family in this little village called Trochenbrod, which was an amazing little city in Ukraine, and what happened. So sometimes if you do a Google book search about the town, also you might find something of
Esther was
interest.
at our conference 2 years ago.
Esther was?
Yeah, you missed her.
Oh, I'm sorry, but I had her as a guest to our JGS in Raleigh, Durham, and she was just amazing. And now I know where her son picked up all of those little crazy habits about putting things in plastic bags. It's Esther.
One source also are Yisker books, which may not list who was in the mass graves at the cemetery in their town, but it would tell you, it would give you a kind of a historical look at what happened to most of the people in that town, even though your family isn't listed. Uh, they might have gone through that. That helped me in learning a little bit about what happened to my family, looking at
A-
Yisker books.
And Mark, you gave my brother-in-law such an incredible gift with that information about Dobermill. You know,
That's
I think
that's
I
that's
think you
why
know what that means.
J.R.I. Poland does what they do,
Yeah.
because
I
there are
mean,
people like your brother-in-law that really need that information. Yeah.
yeah. And at 82, how much longer is he going to wait? Right?
Yep.
Okay. I see also Roberts asked a question, if I can go ahead and take that next. He said that when he looked many years ago, Errolson was not able to search by family name, even from a small town. You needed to have the first and last name. That's no longer true. You can actually search just by the town. Now, that won't be the most fruitful way to search because you're going to get a list of everybody in that town who has a record. And if it's a large town, you'll be spending a lot of time. So if you know the name, that's helpful. But if it's a small town, you might get a list of 200, which I consider very manageable. I don't mind going through 200 names. So try again. Again, I do it every 3 years. Go through everything again. And sometimes when you look at something with fresh eyes, you know how it is. You see something you didn't notice before, give it a try. Let's see. What are some of the other questions?
I had a
Mary?
question. This is
Okay,
Felicia.
Felicia.
I had a question about the camp that was a subcamp of Flossenburg that you mentioned. And I am trying to remember if it was Falkenau am Eder or if it was something else that was a Flossenburg subcamp.
Okay, well, the best way, it's not always um, I shouldn't say the best way, but the fastest way to get information about these kinds of queries now is to use artificial intelligence. My husband's a big fan of Gemini. I'm a big fan of ChatGPT, and I think you just become a fan of whatever you're used to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm at ChatGPT right now, chatgpt.com. If you've never been to the site, you might have to set up an account. What was how
You
should
had
I ask
you
your
mentioned this regarding your father, I think.
he was on in a sub camp of Flossenburg. He was in a sub camp of Dora Nordhausen called Belka Kaserne.
Okay, okay. That's I got that mixed up. Okay.
The thing to do with ChatGPT is to write a very specific question. It's all about the question. It's all about the query. I could say something like, "Tell me about Belka." Let's see, Belka Kaserne sub camp. I mean, you can do this
Yeah.
sub camp. It's a good way to start. A sub camp of Dora Nordhausen. And you'll get an answer in seconds. And this is because
Wow.
the robot is doing what I would do step by step, checking Wikipedia, checking Google.
Hmm.
It's just not it's not as fulfilling because somebody else is doing the work, a robot, but it can give you a way to start. And you'll notice that there are little links here where you can go down the rabbit hole and find out more. So if you're looking at a really obscure topic within the subject matter of the Holocaust, something like Saul's Fatal or the Belka Kasarn, this would be a good place to start. I was helping someone whose father was in Wiesbaden, couldn't remember the name of the camp that was there, and ChatGPT was helpful. Let me also share with you another, if you've got family members who were in a DP camp, there is a website called dpcamps.org, and I would definitely, if I could, check this place out. Well, let's try this. There we go. That's a Wikipedia site, but this is a site that's dedicated just to displaced persons camps and has links. I'll have to look for it a little bit later and send it to Marilyn. These are people who've taken an interest in their families' post-liberation place of residence. A lot of people, as I said, were in DP camps for 5 to 7 years after the war. Bergen-Belsen was the most notable one because well, a lot of famous people came out of the Bergen-Belsen DP camp, but they had a whole community, a newspaper, a theater, incredible place. I see Zippy has said donate Holocaust-related objects to the Holocaust Memorial Museum or any museum. So if you've got your family's first suitcase or they saved an item of clothing, don't throw it away. Don't give it to Goodwill. Absolutely, the local museums as well as the National Museum would be very interested in those things.
I'm just going to interrupt because in Elkins Park, we have a hammock. If you're aware of hammock, the Holocaust
Awareness Museum and Education Center.
There you go. And they collect artifacts. I mean, it's a real museum inside KI Synagogue. It's really an unbelievable place to go.
And Marilyn, as long as you bring that up, let's remember that museums are usually small places and they have to rotate exhibits. So you're walking through there and you think, well, there's nothing here of interest to me. You need to speak to the collections officer and say, do you have anything from so-and-so, this place or that place? Because they won't always be out. I was walking through the Israeli Museum of the Palmach, who were, the soldiers, one of the groups of soldiers before the Israeli defense. And I said, I had a young cousin who died in the war. Do you have anything on him? And they took me to a room that wasn't open to the public that reminded me of the old safety deposit box rooms. And there's a safety deposit box this big with stuff from my little cousin Reuven that his mother had put in there. Pictures of her, pictures of him, documents. He was 16 years old when he died, who he was dating, little diary entries. But you have to ask because it's not out there. So with these little museums especially, make sure that you ask what artifacts they have.
Great idea. I think Barbara Lewis had a question.
Sure, Barbara?
Yes, it's kind of related to what Steve was just talking about. I watched the show years ago, Who Do You Think You Are by Lisa Kudrow. It was the first.
Yeah.
Okay. And she said she learned that her family was from the Ukraine and that she had a relative, didn't know, that died, quote, in the Holocaust. And I said, well, that's interesting. I did not, history-wise, I didn't even know that. I come to find out that my family also comes from the Ukraine. I thought everybody was here. But when I did was doing Google on the family name, which is a very unusual name, a person's name came up and she did die. It was my great-great-grandfather's second wife. And the name was Mamet, very unusual name. And she came here and didn't like it and went back. And when the Germans threw everybody into the pit at Pavlich and killed everybody. And I did find a testimonial from someone that knew her, there. My question is, how do I find out? I do have your, your information, and I see that you have this very, very long address, and I'm going to try it. You say that everybody came. Well, we know that can't possibly be true because
But your question is, what are you looking for? What do you want to
any
find?
possible information, whether it's about the one that died or the family that was there at the time or before or after, you know,
Well,
anywhere.
that's a general genealogy search, right? I mean, you know the
Right.
name of the
Well,
town,
yes, but
right?
oh, Pavlov, yeah, but it's gone.
Mhm.
The town is gone. It's just
No, it's not.
well, I'm
Don't believe.
sorry. The people are gone from the town. I'm sorry.
Well,
The
but
the
there are
Jews are
people,
gone.
the Jews are gone maybe,
Yes.
but the town is there. And
Yes.
there are people who live in or around that town who may
Yes.
know something.
That's the kind of stuff that I might be interested in. I
Okay.
also I also found out through doing a little bit of stuff, you were talking about Skokie. I found in the cemetery where my relatives were born is a section for those from Pavlovich that came to this country, even though my family came to Philadelphia. So I thought that was very interesting. I never even heard that it was like a society. Um,
Yep.
but okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but yes, can you tell
No,
me
no,
about where
that's
to?
okay. I'd encourage you to read Esther's book, Esther Saffron 4. I think the title of it is I Just Want to Let You Know We're Still Here, because she also
Yes,
made the assumption there's nothing left in Trockenbrod.
right.
And she finds out that
Uh-huh.
not only there's plenty left in Trockenbrod, not the town
Uh,
itself and not the people itself, but
right.
people who knew the people in
Mm-hmm.
Trockenbrod. I'd also use ChatGPT to take a look at the name of this town. I'd go on Jewish Gen
I've done
and
that.
see if
Yeah.
anything under Town Finder pops up. I do a general Google search.
Yeah.
Um, and that's just the start. If you want to email me after you've gotten a start and have other questions, I have a very
Mhm.
easy email address. I believe it's on the handout, Debbie the
Okay.
teacher
Oh,
at
yes. Yes.
gmail.com.
Maybe I'd be able to find army records, from
You never know.
grandfather. Okay. Thank you
Um,
very much.
you're welcome. Debbie Cherry wrote a question about she found something actually via Ancestry via the Holocaust Museum about relatives' illegal entry to Palestine. There is a museum in Atlit called the Museum of Clandestine Immigration. What a moniker for a museum. And you would not believe what's in there. Pictures of people getting off the boat. Again, they were maybe their ship had sunk off the coast, or otherwise they were being brought in through Italy. You may want to write to that museum and see if they have anything on your family members. That's an obscure little resource. Again, it's the Museum of Clandestine Immigration. You said, and you got an answer right away. Miracle of miracles. Okay, let's see.
I hope I didn't skip anybody.
I'm just taking a quick look here, and
People loved your presentation, by the way.
well, I'm very
Avraham
appreciative.
Kraus, who my husband's related to, and he wrote all about Landsmannschaft in Philadelphia. He's the expert.
Yeah, I see there was one.
Sorry.
Someone wrote here about there's a Landsmannschaft in Detroit that has experienced a revival. The Trockenbrothers meet in Washington every year. All the descendants. David says yes. The Stockholm Great Synagogue. That was the wall that I showed you had the gallows names on it. That was an incredible find for me. When I finally found these relatives. A lot of the Swedes know English, but I know I sounded like a mad woman. I was calling them in August on a Shabbat. Most of the Swedes go up north. They want to get colder in the summer. So I left a message on a voicemail that sounded something like this to my cousin Jacob. Jacob, you don't know me. I'm your cousin from the United States. I've been looking for you all my life. And then I started, to recite how we were connected, which I'm sure sounded like just a bunch of gobbledygook. And he never called me back. I waited by the phone, and my husband thought I was absolutely going to lose my mind. So finally, I decided I'm going to call Jacob's sister. She was a dentist. She came to the phone. And when I started on the same thing, I've been looking for you all my life. She said, "Yeah, I know who you are. You're that woman who called my brother last night. We thought you were crazy." And I said, "Well, I was, and I am now that I found you." So, if when you do find people, you do want to come off a little bit less crazy than I was. Um, yeah, Zippy points out having an unusual surname is very helpful in these searches because I have been stuck with the Kleins and the Schwartzes, and it's hard for the people who are trying to help you to sift through from one Joseph Schwartz to another. If you don't have more specific information about that person than a common name, they're going to have to sift through a lot of Joseph Schwartz's to find anything that might be of value for you from the Arelson Museum or from the Holocaust Museum. Um, Barbara, you want me to speak a little bit more on Ukraine about the Holocaust by bullets?
Oh, no, I raised my hand, but then I thought it would be easier for me to put it in the chat. So no.
Okay.
Well, the Holocaust by bullets is obviously my family's town. They were all
Yeah,
just shot and dumped.
let me suggest a book for you, and I'll put it up here on the screen that I found helpful and fascinating. It's called, you should be able to see it in a second here. It's called The Ravine, A Family, a Photograph, a Holocaust Massacre Revealed. There is a very famous
Oh,
and iconic photograph of a mother holding a baby, and she's being shot point blank by
God.
Ukrainians. Do you know the photograph? She's in front of a ravine.
No.
Okay, this researcher found who the woman was,
Oh my.
found out who the Ukrainian Nazi was that shot her. And it's
Oh
a
my
for a
God.
genealogist, it's an incredible
Wow.
journey to figure out how did she figure out from this photograph. And she writes a lot about the massacres
Thank you.
in
Okay.
Ukraine as well.
Yeah.
That might be a very
Mhm.
helpful resource
Thank
just
you.
for that.
Mhm.
Uh-huh. Oh, Fred says that Father Dubois was a keynote speaker in 2009
Mhm.
at the IAJGS conference. I am sorry I missed that. I've seen him on video, but never in person. Valerie
He was
Bazaroff is no longer
he
at
was
High.
not that well known in 2009. As a matter of fact, once he committed to it, he tried to back out because he was becoming more, or his organization was trying to back him out because he became more popular, let's say.
Yeah. I think he's got his hands full right now with speaking engagements and a lot of very worthwhile projects he's involved in. It's an interesting approach to the Holocaust by bullets to talk to these witnesses who were young children. And like I was starting to say, I didn't have a lot of sympathy for Ukrainians, but as I listened to many of them, they broke down in their interview. And they said nobody had ever asked them what they'd seen.
Deborah.
And when you talk to survivors, um, the mythology is that they didn't talk about what happened to them. And for some of them, that's true. But I can tell you, for somebody like my mother, the reason she didn't speak, she said, was nobody asked me.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to hear what had happened. Even American Jews, shad.
Yeah.
You're here now, forget what happened. They all had PTSD, everyone that I ever knew, and they still have it. They haven't processed their grief, probably never will. Um, Many of them, as I said, I grew up in a haunted house, just horrible sadness, depression. My mother couldn't laugh because it took something away from everything. She just couldn't enjoy life. So if you know of any survivors who haven't been asked and you can record their story still, please do. Same thing with the American soldiers and all the soldiers who liberated the camps. They all had PTSD. They couldn't describe what they saw. They were 18-year-old boys who stumbled on these places by accident, smelled the camps before they saw the camps. You can just imagine, or maybe we can't imagine what they experienced. You can see A Band of Brothers, which gives you a little bit of insight into the rescue of one camp.
Yeah.
Deborah,
Sorry.
Deborah, I want to give you a little more background on Father Dubois. His
Sure.
father was in a ghetto in a shtetl called Raura Ruska,
Oh,
which was not in Ukraine, which is not far from where my family's town was. And my family was also murdered by the Einsatz group. And I went to the location at Kamianka Stromoloa, and there is absolutely no markings there whatsoever of the 3,000 people that are buried in the ground there.
It's going to be your job, Fred, to make the marking.
Yep.
You were talking about survivors, and you heard Esther Saffron Foer talk. Her father, when she was fairly young, committed suicide.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it wasn't all that common for survivors to commit suicide, but I knew a few. It wasn't all that rare either. And you would think they survived the worst that humanity can show them, and they were giving the finger to Hitler. Why would they commit suicide? But again, their grief caught up with them in some cases.
They needed somebody to talk to, and they wouldn't talk to them, so
Yeah.
everything was internalized, and
Yeah.
that's the result.
One of the saddest conversations I had was with a relative by marriage. And his wife had passed away. She was a survivor, and he was a Canadian dentist. And he said, my biggest regret was every time Miriam wanted to tell me about her family, I told her not to talk about it. What I wouldn't give for a few minutes with my parents, just a few minutes. I have so many questions for them. Well, I would need more than a few, but I would, unfortunately for many of us, if you're in my age cohort, I'm 75. By the time I knew the questions to ask, my parents were gone.
Yeah.
I tried asking a lot, and my mother was willing to speak, but she didn't tell me about things I would want to know now. I didn't ask about her grandparents. She knew them. I know she knew them because I can look at the dates and know that my mother even went to her grandmother's funeral. But I think my mother was so absorbed by her more immediate losses of her own mother and father and her siblings that thinking about the more distant family members was just not something if I'd asked her, she would have told me, but I didn't think to ask. So sorry about that. That's a loss on my part.
Debbie, when you mentioned about the GIs who were liberators, my father was a liberator and he came back with frightful PTSD and would never really talk to my mother or to my brother or to me about what he went through. But we understood what it was because of the things that would trigger him to have nightmares or to, watch a sad movie and he would be inconsolable, crying at the end of it. And now what I'm working on, and I would encourage anybody in our society who has a veteran who is still alive, there aren't many left from World War II, but to have that testimony shared as well, because now I'm trying to get a lot of photographs identified and I'm using a lot of my genealogy sources to get that information because it's a major part of the World War II story.
It is. And there is an organization in Washington for Jewish veterans. I've forgotten the name of the fellow who runs it, but if you'd like to have him do a presentation about the Jewish liberators, oh, there's some great stories there. The Ritchie boys and all of that. Great stories, great stories. And thank you for making sure that those stories don't go away. Debbie Halber wrote in the chat that on January 27th, just coming up, there's a PBS documentary about Elie Wiesel called Soul on Fire. I had an opportunity to be very close to Elie Wiesel when he came to dedicate the museum in Skokie. And I couldn't approach him. Do you understand that? There was an aura about that man. He had suffered so much. I just couldn't bring myself. I listened to him, and I've had an opportunity to read some of his books, and he was an amazing survivor. What he did with his life to honor his father, especially, and his whole experience. Thank goodness for him, and for the others who have made sure the story is not forgotten. Marilyn and Mark and Felicia, I don't want to keep everybody too late. I think we could probably talk for a couple more hours, but
Yeah, I
I'm
agree.
sure people have places to go and miles to go before they sleep, including playing with all those websites I shared.
Yes, indeed.
I just want to say thank you. I will let Felicia and Mark wind up. I just want to remind everyone that the handout is on our website if you didn't get it, or if you are a guest, you can go to our website. Anybody can get the handout.
And the video transcript, Marilyn, I mean, the video of the
The
session.
video will be in the newsletter, which I'll be finishing tomorrow, and send it out this week to our members.
And in the next 24 hours, I will get you a copy of my slides. I have some serious babysitting to do tonight with some grandchildren who are practically breaking down the door here, sticking their
Okay.
tongue on the glass door kind of thing. So I'll get that to you too.
All right, that's great. So I'll send out the newsletter after I hear from you, Debbie.
Okay.
All right, thank you so
Debbie,
much.
thank you. This is
Thank
Felicia.
you,
Thank you
Debbie.
so
That was
much.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope to come up to Philly sometime again. See all of you, very kind folks.
Absolutely.
Thank you for inviting me. And
Okay,
if you,
thank you so much. It was
you're welcome. If you can't be
really
good,
informative.
be better.
Yep.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye, everybody.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.